Highlands Insider. I'm Larissa Williams, your host, and I am joined here today with John Rose, and we have a lot of things to talk about. We are here for our first live audience at Ralph's Donut Shop, a place that has traditionally been wonderful for this community, where lots of things are discussed over coffee and donuts. And I want to thank you today for joining us.
Thank you for having us. This is an old hangout of mine as a kid growing up here in Cookeville. I knew Ralph Smith, and his daughter graduated from high school with me, and I spent a lot of time sitting over here where these guys were sitting as a young boy growing up. My dad, I hope you don't all hold it against me, but he brought us to Ralph's Donuts just about every weeknight. So I got a lot of Ralph's as a young man.
Well, you are no stranger to this area, and for those that are joining us, we are here with John Rose, candidate for governor, and we are here with a live studio audience. So we want to say thank you to everyone. Congressman Rose has spent much of his life in agriculture, business, and public service, and today we're going to talk about his vision for Tennessee, where the state is headed, and how he believes it should grow over the next decade. The question today will be conducted by Highlands Insider, so we can keep things moving and have a chance to hear directly from Congressman Rose. And the first question I thought before Ralph, I can see you teach a butter twist. Would that be your first choice?
It's not even close. This is my first choice, and I've tried to get Chelsea and my boys, and I think I've got them coming around on the butter twist. I think I've almost got them convinced of that. This was my dad's favorite as well, and we always enjoyed being here at about 10 o'clock at night. Derek, on school nights, very often, before the evening news started, we would come to Ralph's, and so I went to bed most nights with a butter twist and a Mountain Dew as my last name before I went to bed.
I noticed you wanted the Mountain Dew as soon as you got here. So.
Right. I did have to switch to diet at some point along the way. Years of too many Mountain Dews took its toll, but still enjoy the donut.
Well, we didn't have to worry about switching coffee because I said mine has the lipstick, so we don't have stuff. Let's jump right into Tennessee politics and direction. So I thought I would start with you served in Congress and spent much of your life in agriculture and business. How have those experiences shaped the way you would approach growing Tennessee?
Well, so we need to.
And governing Tennessee.
Sure, it's been a great honor and privilege that the people of Tennessee and the 6th District have given us to represent them in the Congress. And of course, I have a deep agricultural background as an 8th-generation Tennessean and Tennessee farmer, and grew up in the FFA here in Cookeville and studied agricultural economics at Tennessee Tech. So a lot of interest in agriculture, and we need to always keep in mind that agriculture is still Tennessee's most important industry. Over $100 billion annual impact that ag-economy has. So that would certainly be something that would be top of mind. It's a very tough time for our state's farmers right now. They're caught in a cost price squeeze. They experienced all the inflation of the Biden administration years in terms of the inputs that they have to buy for farming, and then the prices of their commodities have gone down dramatically because, again, the Biden administration failed to open markets and keep markets open for our agricultural products. So one of the things that I would focus on if I get the opportunity to be Tennessee's next governor is finding ways to help improve farm income, finding ways to help encourage farmers to take the raw commodities that they produce and turn them into value-added products that Tennesseans and people around the country and indeed around the world would like to produce. Too often we export our raw commodities and we don't realize as much value as we should from those products. And so one of the things we have to, I think, try to encourage Tennesseans to do is to figure out ways to take those products and turn them into value-added products that Tennesseans and others want to produce. And we always need to keep in mind that the best jobs in our state are the jobs that are born right here in Tennessee.
Absolutely. Well, I know over the next decade, we've already seen massive amounts of growth across the state. What do you believe are the biggest opportunities Tennessee has over the next 10 years? And which opportunities do you think state leadership is currently underestimating?
Well, that's a really good question. So I'll pick up where I left off and say I think there's a lot we can do in the agricultural space, but Tennessee has done very well in a number of other spaces. So the auto industry has certainly become important to Tennessee, and if we want to continue to build on that, there are opportunities there to not only expand the production of autos coming out of Tennessee, but the parts that go into those autos, the value-added products. Chelsea and I had the opportunity just a few weeks ago to visit one of those parts suppliers over in the Knoxville area. Really fascinating. They're making the computer control panels that operate all of the snazzy things in cars today that weren't a part of cars 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so that we have that stuff being made right here in Tennessee by Tennesseans, I think is exciting. I think an area that we have some fear of, but I think is really the future, is artificial intelligence. And we had the opportunity recently to visit the XAI facility in Shelby County, and it's fascinating what they're doing there. We have in Tennessee the largest supercomputer, the most powerful supercomputer in the world. And we all heard that announced 3 or 4 years ago that Elon Musk had selected Memphis, Tennessee as the place to put that. What's really remarkable is that in the last 6 months, they've built the second phase of that, which is many times more powerful than the first phase that we all heard about. The second phase we haven't heard as much about, but a $50 billion investment made in Tennessee in the last 6 months. It's really astounding to see, and to see how quickly they did that, and to then think about the power of that tool for the future of human civilization for Tennessee, and it's really astounding that it's right here in our home state. It's something to be very proud of, and I think it will open so many opportunities. I tell young people, this is the best time in the history of the world to be born, and the best country and the best state in all of the world. So the future really belongs to this generation. They can do whatever their minds can imagine they can make happen.
I agree 100%. Well, let's talk about economic growth, infrastructure. One of the things, talking a little bit about Elon Musk and the new facility in Shelby County, I was amazed at how quickly they built that, and just the fact that he was able to build his own water system so that it didn't impact or create tension within the local residents. But we know that Tennessee has had a tremendous amount of growth, success attracting new companies, but that also brings growth infrastructure issues, housing and energy capacity. So how do you ensure Tennessee grows responsibly without pricing longtime residents out of their communities?
Very good question, and I think one of the toughest issues that we face, frankly, I don't think that's an easy one. There's some things that government can look at, or as a leader I can look at and say, there's an obvious answer to that. This one's tougher because I think we have to balance conflicting values and goals that we have. So we don't want Tennessee not to grow and advance, and we don't want these opportunities to pass us by. But we also can't afford to just blindly pursue them and not be thinking about how is this going to impact the long term for our state? How does it impact native Tennesseans? We've built a really good mousetrap here in Tennessee, right? So we have low taxes and low debt and low regulations, and we're hospitable people, and people want to move to our state. But the more of them that move here, the harder it is for some of us who've been here a long time to make ends meet, to find a house, to afford to live in our own state. And so we have to balance those things. And I think that means some tough decisions as we move forward about do we want to continue to attract as many people as we are, as fast as we are, and can we moderate that growth and yet still move forward? So I think those are some of the choices that we have to make as a state. Again, we don't want to, I don't want to be John Dutton. I don't want to be the guy, I don't want to be the wall against which progress bashes and can't get past, which is we want progress. And I know as a small business owner, building a business, we're not growing dimes. So we want our state to continue to grow, and we just got to be very thoughtful about it. And that's why Chelsea and I have been traveling across the state, listening to people. I had another reporter ask me this past week on Monday. She said, "Why did you get into the race so far out ahead of time? And when the real crux of this race doesn't start until April, May, June of this year?" And I said, "Because I wanted to hear from Tennesseans, and that takes time to do it right." And so we've been having those conversations with people, as politicians like to say, from Mountain City to Memphis. And we've been on all 95 counties, and we've heard what Tennesseans want for the future of the state, and we hear those concerns, and then we have to continue that conversation as we craft policies that balance that growth and make sure that Tennesseans have a place to live in the future of their state.
Well, I think that you all have made it from one end of the state to the other. Every time I look at social media, I see that you're somewhere else in another meeting. I don't know how you guys keep up with all the things, and your children as well. You all have 2 boys. So how is that balancing act when you have family and you have the campaign trail?
Well, that's always tough, and Chelsea, she may want to speak to that. I mean, I couldn't do this without her, and I think everyone in this room and everyone who I talk with understands that, and anyone who's had a great marriage knows how important that relationship is. And we're blessed to have 2 wonderful little boys, Guy, who is 8, and Sam, who's about to turn 5. In fact, Chelsea's been planning that birthday party here in recent days, and they've been champs. Frankly, and Chelsea, of course, is my best supporter, and you know, always coming up with things that I should talk about and say that you know, reveal who we are as people and the humanity that we experience in our lives every day, and so it is a balance though, and sometimes you have to just say we've done all we can do, and we need to go home and play chase at home and get our toys out. And yesterday I got up and I was going to West Tennessee for an event that was pretty early, and I got ready and I came out of our bedroom and all the lights in the house were on. It was 5:30 in the morning and I was like, leave the lights on. And I round the corner going into our kitchen, and there are Guy and Sam sitting at our kitchen counter, and they had every bit of Play-Doh that we own out on the counter, and all the molds. And they both looked up with just bright-eyed and chipper and said, "Look, Daddy." And of course, you know, I'm thinking, oh my God. And so, you know, the first reaction is, this is not good. Mom's not going to be happy. My next reaction, though, is how blessed I am to have 2 such wonderful boys, and that they're so happy playing with each other, and that they got up, they were ready to go, and up and out at it early.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of family, you know my great-grandmother was a family farmer, tobacco and cattle. She raised her family with that. And we know that our family farmers are facing extreme cost measures, land pressures, lots of different things. What should the state do to protect the family farms while still encouraging economic growth?
Well, again, it's one of those tough questions because it brings kind of 2 conflicting values again that we have as Tennesseans. So we so much value our farmland, and today I think Tennesseans generally are aware, if you're paying attention, we're losing 10 acres of farmland every hour. So in the space of the time we're talking today, we're going to lose 10 acres of land. And that's not sustainable, and it doesn't lead us to the future that we want, where we are preserving this valuable landscape that we have in Tennessee, and these wonderful farms, and the opportunity to produce the food and fiber that we need for the future. On the other hand, if we restrict what people can do with their land, it offends our notion that property rights are so important in this country, and that farmers so often store up the value of all their years of work in the land that they own. And so you don't want to then deprive them of the ability to realize that value at some point potentially in the future. So you have to balance that. The legislature and the governor, the current governor, have put in place kind of a very early stage effort to help encourage conservation easements. That's one way to do it. But those things are expensive to do. So I think we have to have a real conversation as a state and communities across the state about how do we balance preserving the land. And I know as a farmer, you know, we fragmented our land. and most farmers know that. So if you want to have an operation at scale to produce today in a profitable way, if you have to travel across 2 or 3 counties to get enough land together to have an operation that can be successful, that's tough. Yes. And so, when we fragment our land by putting in developments here and there and yonder, then it makes it harder down the line for farmers to be successful. So it's a tough question. I think encouraging farmers to conserve their land, to make that decision on their own, that's a very important piece of this. I think the most important piece of it will be doing the things that Tennessee can do, and we've done some of those historically, so that our farmers can be financially successful. Because if farmers are financially successful, then they'll keep their farms and they'll continue to farm because that's what they love to do. And if farming has a lot of promise for the next generation, then more young people want to be farmers. So that's really the key answer, is to do everything we can to encourage successful farms in terms of their financial performance, so people can keep the land and keep on farming.
Sounds good. Well, I would describe myself as a Christian conservative constitutionalist. So I've got a constitutional question here. As the governor, you would take an oath to uphold the United States Constitution as well as the Tennessee State Constitution. In recent years, we've seen the courts increasingly shaping policy decisions from gun rights to environmental rules and educational policy. How do you see the proper balance between courts interpreting the Constitution and elected lawmakers making policy? Are there circumstances where you believe a governor has a duty to push back on federal policies if they conflict with constitutional principles?
Well, I'll start at the end there and say absolutely. I think we saw that in the preceding presidential administration, where the federal government was trying to exceed its natural boundaries. When the founders, the framers of the Constitution, put in place this wonderful experiment of our republic, they were very deeply fearful of a large, overbearing federal government. They just spent the better part of 10, 15, 20 years freeing themselves from tyranny. And so the last thing they wanted to do was recreate that. So that's why they struggled so in trying to find the right balance. And so I think if they were around today, they'd be pretty happy, in my view, with the way Congress works. They wanted us to be tied in knots, and they did a pretty good job of doing that, I think.
It's amazing when you think about how they put that together at their young ages.
Yes, and so I think if they saw that, they'd be pretty happy. I think the things they'd be unhappy about is the degree to which Congress has delegated away its authority to the executive branch, empowering the executive to do things that they would not have imagined the executive could do. And I think Congress is in the early stages of reclaiming that power. But we've also seen the courts assert themselves in a way that I think the founders would not have anticipated. And we've all become too dependent, I think, and too reliant on hoping the courts will step in and rule the day. And that's not what the framers envisioned. So I think the courts need to limit themselves at every step along the way, and we should see the legislative branch be, they want equal branches, but I think the legislative branch is the place where the people's voice is most directly heard, and I think that's what the framers would want. And so I think we need to select jurists going forward that will be as limited as possible, and when they stick their nose into the business of the people. And we've seen that, with things like marriage, where the Supreme Court of this country overruled states across the country and said, we're going to change the definition of marriage. Even California, they overruled on this issue. And so I think that's an example. I think we see some positive movement there with the recent appointments to the Supreme Court, and they're carving back, for example, saying the question of life, we're going to return to the states for the people to decide that. And I think that was the right choice, and I certainly support that. And proud to live in a state where we champion life and we do everything we can to preserve the right to life.
I agree. Well, let's talk about public safety. Public safety continues to be a concern for many Tennesseans. how do you see the role of state leadership in supporting local law enforcement and maintaining safe communities?
Oh, well, it's critical, and I think that my good friend Eddie Ferris, who's sitting over here next to us, we've been friends for a long time, and he is a valued and trusted friend and advisor on these sorts of issues. We always need to keep in mind that government that governs best is the one that's closest to the people. So at the county level, and I think that's true in law enforcement, our sheriffs all across the state, they're on the leading edge of law enforcement in this state. And so the state government should be supporting them and not detracting from them. And so too often I think we put mandates on our sheriffs that then they don't have the resources to respond to. So we've got to always be thoughtful and careful about that. When we ask as a state, we ask our counties to house many state prisoners, and then we don't compensate them adequately for that. So we're asking them to take on that burden. It should be a state burden. And so we just got to have a governor that I think is listening to sheriffs across the state, to local law enforcement. There are times when the local authorities fail us, though, and we see that, for example, in Shelby County, where as a county, they just have not gotten the job done in terms of enforcing crime there and keeping crime in check. And so the state has a responsibility to ride herd over those things and step in when it's necessary and find ways using the authority and power and resources that the state has to help those counties, those localities get back on track.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you that live in Shelby County that want people to step in and help. We're blessed to be here in Putnam County where we don't have those same kinds of issues. But I think having the ability to step in at the right time makes all the difference.
And it's a multi-pronged approach. I think anyone who's watched shows like Law and Order knows you've got Eddie and the Sheriff's Department and the local police departments across the state. Their job is to go out and they face the direct day-to-day danger of confronting criminals in our communities across the state. But we also have district attorneys who have a critically important role to play. We're blessed in this community to have a very great DA and assistant DAs that are prosecuting the crimes that for when Eddie and others make arrests. So and then we have to have good judges that use their judgment well and apply the law correctly and aggressively and make sure that we keep the bad guys off the streets. And this is one of the problems, again, turning back to Memphis, where we see that system breaking down, where we don't have a DA that will aggressively prosecute the crimes that are committed or criminals that are brought into the system, and then judges that are failing to aggressively enforce our laws. And so we've got to have all those things working. And then I'll also speak to the prison system in Tennessee. Once we convict someone of a crime and they're paying their debt to society, and we take custody of them, we have an obligation to maintain their safety and security inside that institution. And sometimes our state has failed to live up to that obligation. So we've got to do that. And we also need to remember that many of those criminals, most of them, they're going to serve their sentence, they're going to pay their debt to society and come back out, and we've got to make sure they're ready to be productive members of society when they come back out of the system.
Well, let's transition into education. I know a lot of parents want to make sure that they're investing in the education, investing in real opportunities. We also have school choice, different things that have came up over the past year or 2 years. What changes, if any, do you believe Tennessee needs in its education systems to better prepare students for the workforce and higher education?
Again, a very good question, and it's the number one issue as I visit with Tennesseans across the state. People are concerned about the quality of education, the outcomes that we're getting for their children and for Tennessee kids. And the place that I started this, and I'm a product of public schools, and Chelsea is a product of public schools, and we're so committed that our kids are going to attend public schools. Our attending guy is second grade in Smith County now, and Sam will be a kindergartner this coming year. And we've been very pleased with the quality of the education that we see our sons getting. And so for our state, we need to remember that whatever else we do, close to 90% of our kids are going to graduate from a public school. And so we've got to get the results in the public school system that we need in Tennessee. If we're not, we're failing. Now, having said that, there are parents who find themselves in situations where they're not comfortable with the quality of the local school district that they have, and they want options. And so I'm certainly in support of trying to give parents as many options as possible. So in this campaign, we visited public charter schools that are public schools, but a little bit different from the classic public school, and I think there's a place for those kinds of schools to exist. We've also visited private and parochial schools, and many times those provide the answers for Tennessee families. So we support there being those choices, and we want to be sure that when Tennesseans of whatever economic means face this question, that they have a realistic opportunity to get their kids into a winning school situation. So, we'll certainly approach that. One of the commitments that I've made is that if the people of Tennessee elect me or hire me to be their next governor, we'll have a commissioner of education who has spent time teaching in a Tennessee public school. And I think that's important. My mom was a teacher. My sister Cindy was a teacher. Her husband Steve was a teacher. So I have a lot of familiarity with that. And I think it is important in whatever endeavor in life. You want the people who are called on to lead to be folks who understand what it's like to be in the streets. And so I think that's why we want a commissioner of education who understands that. We've got some great commissioners and they're nice people, but I think we want to see that experience in our next commissioner. So we'll commit to do that. I'll wrap up by saying this. I was a product of Putnam County Schools, Cookville City, the schools here in the city, and I got a great education. My friend Derek down here, we were in school together. I know he got a great education, and then we went on to Tennessee Tech. We want that to continue. I was on a college preparatory path at Cookville, but I also took vocational education, and I am, absolutely convinced I wouldn't be sitting here today simply if I hadn't gotten a great education in the vocational arena. And it gave me so much appreciation for how things are done, how things are made, and so we need to keep in mind that today we don't have enough folks in the skilled trades across this country, and we see that recognition growing all across the country. Obviously, Governor Lee recognized that when he ran, and he's invested heavily in that. I think we still need to find ways to encourage our kids to think about what the future is. We talk about artificial intelligence. I'm a recovering lawyer, and artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of the work that I was trained to do as a lawyer. But for those folks who know how to weld and wire, put in electrical wiring or do HVAC work, or all these other skilled trades, no computer is going to do that, at least not in the near term, and probably not ever. And so if you need some plumbing repaired, you need a plumber, and you can ask Siri about that, but that's not going to get the job done.
It might tell you where to go, but it's not going to tell you. It'll say, here's who you can call, and give you options. But at the end of the day, you're going to need that skilled labor.
That's right.
So, Congressman, let us move into the next topic, and that way we might have some time for audience questions. Would you guys like to do some audience questions?
Yes.
So, in your time in public service as today, what do you hope Tennesseans say you protected, even when it wasn't politically easy?
Yeah, you've got good questions. So, two things come to mind. Why? I think I would put at the top of the issue. It's sometimes easy to back away from some of those convictions, but as a Christian with a deep Christian faith and a recognition from the friends Chelsea and I've had, we lost a son, Mac, and so from that experience, I just it reinforced what I already thought about how precious life is and how we ought to do everything we can to protect the most vulnerable. And sometimes that forces you to take awkward positions and to fights that would be easier not to. Also, standing up for I think in the republic, the democratic side of our constitutional republic is the right to vote. And so I have, throughout my time in Congress, fought for protecting the sanctity of the vote. Right now, that's about getting, hopefully, the Save America Act across the finish line. We passed it twice in the House. Unfortunately, we can't get the Senate interested in taking this issue on. And I think it's the most important issue. So I would say to everyone listening, the President's with us. The House has done it twice. We haven't had much help from the Democratic side, to be honest with you. We've got to get the Senate to take that up. And they've got to, whatever it takes, they need to get that job done, in my view, because I think if we fail to do that, we've already seen, we've had a foreshadowing, the 2020 election. And I guess this would bring me back to the beginning of your question. That was maybe one of the toughest calls that I've faced as a member of Congress. The 2020 election was deeply flawed. And I think as a result of that, I was called upon on January 6th to make a decision. And certainly we had a disruption of what we were doing that day. Some shrunk in the moment and didn't have the courage to do what they said they were going to do. But many of us did, 147 of us in the House and Senate stood up that day and said, no, this election was not done properly, and we're going to stand up for the voters in our state that have been disenfranchised by what happened in this case 6 states, I believe, where there were significant problems. And, I feel some vindication here now 5, 6 years later, because we saw what happened in 2016 with the election, and then we have 2020, and now we have 2024. And I think as history looks at this, we're going to see that it will become into clearer and clearer focus that 2020 was flawed, and we should have stood up there to fight for the right answer, and many of us did. And there was a price to pay for that. The folks who abandoned that got 30 pieces of silver. And those of us who stood up that day, took a little beating. And I lost friends in this community who felt I was providing the wrong answer, but I'm convinced it was the right answer.
Well, I believe it was the right answer as well. Let's jump into some audience questions. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
So if you're just joining us, I'm Clarissa with Highlands Insider in Cookville Now, and we are live at Ralph's Donuts. We've got our live audience. Who would like to ask a question?
Myself on the small business, sometimes big businesses keep coming into the state and kind of swallow us up.
Sure. Well, I think you raised an issue that I talk about often. There's the fifth issue that I talk about so often is job creation, economic development. And I think far too often our tendency as a state historically has been to chase these big announcements of big businesses that come in. We give them incentives to come here. They create lots of jobs, and that's often a good thing and a catalyst for changing communities. But as I said earlier, the best jobs are the ones that are born here in those small businesses. And as a small business owner myself, creating an idea and taking it from that idea phase all the way to fruition that's critically important. And so we need to craft our economic development initiatives so that they are supporting the success of those small businesses, including farmers and agriculture. So, for example, we have programs at the state level that help farmers invest in making their farms more successful. We should do more of that for small businesses and for farms to make sure that they can flourish.
Very well. I like that shade of lipstick.
Well, so we see this all across the state, right? Too often the road to the future is filled with potholes or not wide enough or able to take the load of the traffic. This is again one of those really tough problems because this is not to fix. This is a big challenge for our state. Some of the data that you see out will say that we're about 40 billion behind $40 billion in projects. I just met a week or so ago, a couple weeks back, with the TDOT Commission, and they're now saying that the cost of fixing this problem is now $59 billion. I see our Vice Mayor shaking his head here. And so this problem exists all across the state. There's the local element to it, and certainly the state, there's the federal element to it. We just haven't been investing enough to keep up. And the legislature has stepped up in the last 3 or 4 years, and they've put more resources in. I think this is one of those things, again, where we have to have a conversation as a state. We have to decide what is the level of resources and where are we going to get those resources. So Tennessee's had 2 pillars of how we approach roads. One is that we pay as we go. We don't have debt generally for our road projects. The second one is that we haven't had toll roads. Now, probably some people aren't paying close attention, and you may not realize we just put in place a law that's going to be parking that. It's coming soon, and that is the Transportation Modernization Act that passed by the legislature. The first project that you will see is going to happen between Nashville and Murfreesboro, and it's going to violate both of those 2 pillars. So, number one, they're going to have what they call sales lane. But they're going to be, when you pay extra to drive on the lane. We have a word for that, right? It's called toll. Now, they're going to be a little bit different from Grandpa's toll roads, but they're still going to be, you pay to drive in this faster lane. Our Tennessee is going to like that when it comes. Yes, it's going to mean new capacity. That's good. Maybe you would like that, but when you think, I'm paying gas tax already, I'm paying registration fees, etc., and now they're asking me to pay again if I can't drive in front. And on top, and then again, in addition to that, it violates the financing, the pay-as-you-go part. We're going to ask private sector players to build those roads, and they're going to own them, and they're likely going to be foreign companies. So think about that. We really want the Spanish to own Interstate 24 for 50 years. That's going to be kind of troubling. And the other thing to keep in mind there is they're going to finance. We're financing that. They're going to go do it. The state's not going to borrow the money, but this private sector player is going to do that. And they're going to expect a better rate of return than what we as Tennesseans would have to pay if we just borrowed the money directly as a state at 4 or 5%. The cost, the financing cost of those roads to the private sector is going to be 12 or 15%. And we're all going to pay that. There are really only 2 ways to pay for roads. One is you pay a tax or a fee based on your use of the roads. Today we pay fuel tax, registration fees, taxes on new cars, taxes on tires, things like that. Those could be directed that are kind of track your use of the roads. The second way is to tax other stuff, like donuts, and then use that money to pay the roads. But at the end of the day, we pay for them. And so we've got to have a conversation of how much do we want to solve, how much are we willing to spend to solve this problem. We haven't been keeping up. And so if we want to keep up on that, we're going to have to invest in it.
Just a quick question, dovetail on something you just said a moment ago about public education and 90% of our students in Tennessee graduate from public school. What are your views about this legislation about school choice? And is that a wise use of helping children in those classes?
So we've been through a real, I guess you could say, some people would say, bruising fight over how, do we embrace school choice and how do we encourage and foster that. And so we're kind of a ways into this now. We had a kind of an early stage program that was aimed at Memphis and Nashville and some of our other metro areas that we were kind of hoping to see, does this work, where we were giving vouchers to kids to use to go to private schools. And then last year, the legislature expanded that across the entire state. And it's expensive. And the idea is we're going to make it possible for parents who want to send their kids to private schools to get what's called an education freedom scholarship. And the hope is, of course, that will create some options for parents, and then ultimately that will drive broader outcomes. And I think it's worth seeing if that will work. I think there's some things that we need to make sure that are happening. Number one, we need to measure those results. Is it producing better outcomes? And it can't just produce better outcomes for the kids who go to those private schools. It has to ultimately be lifting everyone. So we have to be ultimately able to look back at this and say, okay, our results across the board are improving. Because if let's say it's 10% of kids that go to private schools because of that program or otherwise, if they're doing really well, that's great. But if the 90% that are still in public schools are not doing better, then that program's not working. And so that's why I say we've got to get it right in our public schools. That's the challenge. Now the good news is the reforms of the last say 16 years have made a real difference. So we've gone from being normally as a state ranked in the bottom 10 of the 50 states, and now we're ranked in kind of in the mid-tier. We're in the 30s to high 20s. So we've seen real progress, and we want to continue that progress. And the really good news, I think about as I'm here in Cookeville today, and the Cookeville Lady Cavaliers are vying for state championship, playing right now while we're talking. Yep. And so we hope they're successful. But we want to see that success come broadly. And so we've got to make sure that we're doing that and take those investments that they are. If they're not, then we've got to reimagine that program. Here's the good news. We've seen that real improvement in schools. And I think about the Cavaliers, I lost my way there for a second, but they've got great coaches, right? Any great team, they got good players. But probably the girls in Cookeville, as good as they are, they're not necessarily better than every other girl across the state. They've just got a good coach. And every team I've ever been on, the outcomes are because I've been coached well, right? And so they've got good coaches. And every good coach I've ever dealt with had a way of breaking things down. And here's how we're going to get to where we want to be. So here's a fact for you about education outcomes. If over the next 8 years, each year, we got one more student in each classroom for the attainment time across the sky, and you did that every year for 8 years, you'd be in the top 10 for all outcomes across Tennessee. And that ought to be our goal. And so if you think about it, that's still a big task. But when you break it down that way, it seems much more achievable. And again, I suspect that Cookeville's in that state championship because at every step along the way in recent years, they've been teaching the fundamentals. They've been improving incrementally, and that ultimately leads to a championship. We hope.
So we've got time for one more question.
Congressman, thank you for being here. A lot like you, I'm a county commissioner here locally. Get out all day sometimes and talk to people. There's one question that's the most important thing that people in this district, and that's property taxes. We've been very blessed here in our community over the last 10 years where we have had to raise property taxes more than about 1%. But there's a lot of other counties that aren't seeing that. They're talking about that at the state level right now. Can you give me your view on the property tax issues and how you feel about that and making sure that we can keep that burden as low as our people as possible?
Sure, and you're right. This is an issue. I guess two elements of that. Later this year, we'll all have a vote in November about whether we constitutionally disallow a statewide property tax. And I think that's something we want to do. We don't have a state property tax, and we haven't in decades. But it is, I think, a good idea to make sure that we prohibit that from happening. I think that's a good idea. The property tax has historically been the main source of income for many cities and counties, particularly rural cities and counties. If they don't have a robust sales tax, then they're depending very heavily on the property tax. And I think by and large our counties and cities across the state have done a pretty good job at keeping those low. Again, that's one of the reasons people are coming to our state is because they come here and they can't believe how low our property taxes are. And so I think local government has done a good job. And as a Republican, and as a conservative, I remember this adage that we talk about all the time. The government that governs best is the one that's closest to the people. When you don't get closer than cities and counties, right? And bad news for you, as a aspiring county commissioner, when the folks don't like what you're doing, they can kick you out. And it's easier.
As they should.
As they should. And it's easier to defeat a city councilwoman or a county commissioner than it is a state legislator or a federal legislator. And so I think that I have serious concerns about the state legislature substituting its judgment for our local cities and counties in terms of what property tax levels should be. And if they're going to do it, I think there are two things you have to keep in mind. How are cities and counties going to make ends meet? If the state legislature tells them you're capped, then I think that raises some serious questions about how do cities and counties cope with, in many cases, mandates that they're given. And Sheriff Ferris can tell us about that. You know about some of those mandates. Maintenance of effort mandates, et cetera. And then they say, but you can't change the taxes that you use to fulfill those mandates. So there's that to be concerned about. And then there's this reality, which is if the state legislature says you can only increase the property tax, and I think the current proposal is this, 2% a year, and maybe 6% over 3 years. And if you don't do it, then you can't go back and pick it up. And the only way you can go outside those limits is to get a vote of the people, which is very tough. And so I think what that legislation is going to lead to is an automatic annual increase in property taxes across the state, which is less conservative than what cities and counties generally are delivering to their people now. So, as we think about this, I think you've got to keep that in mind. There's an old political adage that it's easier to tell a simple lie than it is to explain a complicated truth. And if you look at the polling data right now, some people would say, hey, the people of Tennessee are in favor of property tax limits. That's true. I mean, I suspect if I said, how many in here would like to see property taxes not go up? I can ask that question, and every hand will go up. But if I say, how many of you want your property taxes to go up every year, 2%? No hands go up.
And then I get in trouble because we're having to raise taxes. And the state's making us do it, so I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, so
we believe it needs to stay here locally.
I think
Let
so.
us manage our own finances.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Congressman Rose. I'll give you the final word before I close this out. If there's anything you'd like to share with our audience online or.
Sure. Well, thanks, first of all, to Highlands Insider. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with your audience today. It's been the greatest honor and privilege of my life to represent Tennesseans. I'm coming home because I think the founders and framers wanted a citizen legislature, but I think I've got some service left in me. And I think the experiences I've had of building businesses, of managing my farm, of leading people in organizations, I think they give me the skills that would allow me to be an effective governor for Tennessee. And so I ask for your vote, and I hope I'll have an opportunity to earn your vote in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you the next time. Remember to be a light, be bright, and be bold. And thank you to Ralph's Donuts for letting us use this facility today. If you haven't had your butter twist, tongue twister, come out, grab a donut, and have a great day. Thank you.